Hi everyone, welcome back to Kendrick's Vintage Kitchen. Today I will be doing another I Love Lucy recipe, and it will be out of the same cookbook I've been using. And I thought I'd pick off from last time where I was talking about the job switching episode. And this episode is from season 2 of I Love Lucy. And I will also be putting the last episode I made of my I Love Lucy series in the description below in case you'd like to catch up from what you've missed. So where I left off last time, Lucy just found out that Ricky picked up these breakfasts from the drugstore and he left his hat down there. So Lucy was starting to get ready to leave with Ethel to find a job at the agency. So Ethel finally comes into the kitchen and both the girls leave, and they show up at the job agency and the guy asks, "What can you do?" And the girls ask, "What kind of jobs do you have open?" And it keeps going back and forth until the guy says, "Well, maybe we're trying this the wrong way about." And so then Lucy asks, "What kind of jobs do you have open?" And the guy, accidentally says, "Well, what do you do?" And he finally says, "That's enough. All right." So then he starts listing off the list of jobs that are available, and finally the girls pick on candy making job. So then the girls, go and show up at this candy making facility, and then it pans back over to the men, and the men are supposed to be making dinner that night, and Fred and Ricky are talking about the dinner, and Ricky says, it'd be a bit ridiculous if they both have to make a meal. And so they both decide that they'd make one part of the meal, so Ricky would make the chicken and rice, and then Fred was going to make a cake. And so that's what ends up happening. And then it goes back to the women, and you see whoever's in charge of both the girls are showing where they're going to be working. And Lucy sits down next to this other lady, and the woman in charge says, "You'll be dipping these truffles in the chocolate." And so Lucy starts kind of working with the chocolate and stuff, and then all of a sudden she gets an itch on her nose, and she asks the girl next to her, "Hey, what do you do when you get an itch on your nose?" And the lady next to her obviously doesn't reply, and Lucy says, "Well, is that so?" And so then eventually Lucy finally caves in and touches her nose with the chocolate on her hands. And then she goes back to working with the chocolate, and then all of a sudden there's a fly flying around in the room, and Lucy says, "There's a fly in here." And the lady still hasn't said anything to Lucy. And so Lucy's, trying to catch this fly, and eventually she accidentally, this fly was on this lady's face, and she accidentally, slaps the lady's face with chocolate hands, and so both the lady and Lucy are slapping chocolate on each other's faces. And so eventually, Lucy gets pulled from that department, and then it goes back to the men, and you see Ricky with a vacuum cleaner, and he's got a little stand on his vacuum cleaner and reading the newspaper while he's vacuuming, and Fred comes in and with the cake he made. And so Ricky's like, "Oh, great, you've got this cake already made and all that." And he said, "Let's see." And Fred takes the cover off, and here's this little tiny one-layered skimpy cake looking thing. And Ricky says, "That's it?" And he's all like, where's the, all the other 6 layers or whatever, because there's supposed to be 7 layers, and there was only this one little tiny layer. And Fred said, it's all in there. And Ricky says, well, that's fine, we can put globs of frosting on top. And Fred says, well, that's in there too. And Ricky's like, it's in the cake? And Fred says, yeah, isn't that, what you're supposed to do? And Ricky says, no, you're supposed to put it on top of the cake. And Fred's like, oh, well, how's things going, with the chicken and rice? And Ricky says, well, how does a pound of rice per person sound? And Fred says, yeah, that sounds about right. And then all of a sudden a big loud explosion happens in the kitchen, and both of the men go into the kitchen, and they see that the pressure cooker, the lid fell off. And Ricky takes a look in the pressure cooker, and his chickens aren't there, and he's like, where are the chickens? And Fred looks up at the ceiling, and he says, are those your birds? And Ricky's like, yeah, what are they doing up there? And they end up falling from the ceiling and landing on the ground. And so both Ricky and Fred pick up the chickens, and they then proceed to wash the chickens with some soap and a brush in the sink. And so while they're doing that, the rice that Ricky's cooking on the stovetop is boiling over. And finally, Fred turns around and says, oh no, look what's happening. And Ricky's like, oh no. And so they're both trying to put all the rice back in the pot, and it's just a mess. Ricky's slipping around, and then it pans back to the women, and the women both got kicked out of the departments they were working in, and they both end up in the candy wrapping department. And so they're both wrapping candy, and so it was going good at first, and then it started how many chocolates were on there got too many, and so they were like, trying to collect all the chocolates so they could wrap them as they go, and it's getting a little bit out of hand. And finally the line stopped because the lady in charge was going to come back, and so here's Lucy and Ethel stuffing chocolates down their shirt and in their mouth and in their hats. And the lady comes in, and she says, great, you guys are doing good, and then she says to the other lady on the other side who's putting the chocolates on the line, she says, speed it up a little. And oh my goodness, so many chocolates were coming down, and they couldn't keep up. And so then you see, obviously they got fired from the job, and you see them coming home, and they both got stomach aches. And Lucy sees this, she was going to go into the kitchen and get some bicarbonate soda, and she sees this sign on the kitchen that says don't go in or whatever. And Lucy goes in, and she yells and comes right back out of the kitchen. She says, oh, there's so much food on the ceilings, on the walls, food everywhere. And Ethel says, oh, food, they can't even think about it. And finally the men come home, and they said, well, I hope you didn't go in the kitchen. And Lucy said, I already did. And he said, oh, we feel so terrible about what happened. And so he said, we got you girls something. And both Ricky and Fred pull out a 5-pound box of chocolate, and then the girls fall over on the couch. And that's the end of the episode. So if you haven't guessed what I'm going to be doing today in my episode, I will be making the 7-layered chocolate cake. Let's see if I can find it. Yes, the Fred Mertz 7-layer give or take chocolate cake. If you want to see what it looks like, there it is. All right, now that I talked about the episode, let's get to making the cake. so let's get started on the cake. It says to preheat the oven to 350, which I have. And then it says grease and line up to 7 9-inch round cake pans with parchment paper, then grease the parchment or wash and reuse pans after each bake to make 7 layers. So I've got my pans all ready with the parchment paper and the pans are greased. Now it says in a large bowl, whisk together flour, cocoa powder, baking soda, and salt, and then set aside. So it calls for 4 cups of flour, which I have in this bowl, and then it calls for 1 1/4 cup of unsweetened cocoa powder, which I will add to my flour bowl. And then it calls for 3 teaspoons of baking soda. And then it calls for 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Right, now I'm gonna whisk that together. Now I've got all that whisked together, then I'm gonna set that aside. All right, so I set my flour mixture aside. Now I'm in a bowl of an electric mixer, cream, butter, and sugar, and then it says to add eggs until combined. So I'm just gonna use a hand mixer today, and then I've got my butter and sugar in a bowl, and it calls for 1 1/4 cups of unsalted butter, which is 2 1/2 sticks. And then it calls for 2 1/2 cups of granulated sugar. And then when I add the eggs, it calls for 4 large eggs. So let's mix up the butter and sugar. Alright, well my butter and sugar is mixed up. Now I'm going to add my eggs. Get my eggs out.
Yeah.
Alright, and I'll be right back. I'm going to wash my hands real fast. Alright, let's mix up the eggs.
Alright,
So now I've got my egg mixture all mixed up here. Now it says alternate adding the dry ingredients with the buttermilk and coffee. Next, stir in the vanilla. So I'm going to add, it says 2.5 cups of buttermilk and then half a cup of coffee at room temperature.
Why?
So I've got my buttermilk here.
Oh, why?
And then I've got my coffee. I'm gonna start adding in my dry ingredients here. Now I'm gonna keep adding my dry to my wet until it's all mixed together. So I'll see you then.
I'm chicken.
Alright, now I'm gonna add my vanilla and it calls for a teaspoon of vanilla.
Alright.
Now that I got my vanilla in there, it says bake each cake for 15 minutes or until a toothpick tester comes out clean. Remove from oven, let cool 10 to 15 minutes or until cake is cool enough to handle. Invert into a wire rack and let cool completely. And wash and reuse pan if needed. So now I'm gonna add my cake batter to my 7 pans here. And then I'm gonna bake them, and then once that they are all cooled off, I'll see you then.
I chicken.
Alright, so I've got all my cakes out of the oven, and they've been cooling for a while now. So now I'm going to start on the frosting. So it says, in a large saucepan over medium-high heat, bring the heavy whipping cream to a simmer. And then it says, place the chocolate chips in a medium bowl and pour heavy whipping cream over them. Let chocolate soften, then whisk until smooth. Whisk in the vanilla and salt, sit for 20 minutes or until slightly cooled or thickened. So it calls for 3 cups of heavy whipping cream, 3 cups of semi-sweet chocolate chips, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and 1/4 of salt. So I've got my heavy whipping cream over here. And it looks like it's ready, so I'm going to take it off the heat and I'm gonna put it over my chocolate chips that I have in this bowl. And then I'm gonna let that sit for a little bit until the chocolate softened a little bit. And then I'm gonna add in my vanilla here and my salt. And then once I do that and let it sit for 20 minutes, I'll see you again, and then we're gonna stack our cakes with the frosting. Alright, I'm back. I've let my ganache or frosting, I guess, sit for 20 minutes, a little bit even longer. I've even tried putting it in the freezer and all sorts of stuff, and it's pretty loose. So I'm just gonna say screw it, and my cake's gonna be exactly like Fred's, unfortunately. So it says, place one cake on a plate, pour a half a cup of the icing to cover the layer, then top with the second cake. Repeat until all 7 layers are stacked and frosted. So let's do it. Do my first cake. Alright, well, there's my cake. I'm gonna cut myself a slice real fast, and I'll be right back. Alright, well, let's see how it tastes after making such a big mess. Well, it tastes alright. I definitely think I could use maybe a different frosting recipe on this. Because normally, I do make cakes quite often, and they do not turn out like this. So maybe it's just because of the recipe and the episode and the whole thing. So other than that, yeah, it's pretty good. Well, I hope you enjoyed this recipe and video. If you did, please share, like, and subscribe to my channel. And I hope to see you again. And don't forget, I will put the cookbook down in the description below so you can get it for yourself. All right, see you again. Bye.